things that are in here of public
Oh,
boards and committees.
that's new.
There's some stuff that
I told these guys they wouldn't have to be on TV.
Well, when it goes on, what you say is picked up until it's turned off. So just
It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
I have to be more.
yeah, because we'll be a lot of kicks under the table, nudges.
Interestingly enough, as an aside, NPR has a radio live broadcast of the selectmen's meetings on Wednesday. They pick up the feed from the live streaming, and I did not actually realize that it keeps going when the meeting is over. So I found that out when someone mentioned that they can still hear me talking after the meeting.
What were you talking about?
Well, I don't remember. I don't think it must not have been too terrible because I didn't actually hear any more. In any case,
Scary stuff.
Thank you. Some of you were at our meeting last week when we presented the fiscal 16 capital project request to the board, and we're going to do something similar, although,
Sorry. Terry Norton, is she going to be taking minutes?
She was supposed to be here.
Sometimes she has some other thing to do, but if she's not here, we'll get the meeting taped and she'll transcribe later.
Thank you.
We're going to give you a similar presentation, but there are a couple of changes that are probably going to occur since we made the presentation to the board last week. I also want to mention for the new members, although you may know a little bit of this, we spent quite a lot of time with the committee last year working on the long-term capital financing plan, which is this book, and it is in the process right now of being updated with the fiscal 16 requests. We do have a true-up of the requests that were in the long-term capital financing book and what was actually submitted. There is a bit of a difference, but it's not all that material. So Brian can talk a little bit about what our financial advisor is doing to update the plan. I think what we're going to do is Brian's going to go through a brief presentation that we gave to the board last week. It's an overview and a kind of a comparison to the long-term capital financing plan, and then I'm going to just take you quickly through the projects, because as you know, in the coming weeks, the departments are going to be in to review them specifically.
Libby, do you want us to hold questions till say the end?
Maybe, you know, what do you guys think? I don't mind if you ask them as we go.
Okay.
If we think they're going to be answered later, we'll say that's going to be answered.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Libby. So I'm going to walk you through the PowerPoint that we had presented to the selectmen last week with the results of the update from departments of the 10-year capital plan. This is solely focusing on fiscal 16. As Libby said, we did do a true-up of the entire plan. We have sent the new plan, which everyone has in this packet, to First Southwest, and Cinder and her team are actually working on updating the entire plan to reflect any additions, move forwards, move backs in the plan. So the hope is in the next couple, probably week and a half to 2 weeks, they'll have something that we can kind of look at briefly. As I go through this, I'll explain where some of the remaining items that need to be addressed are going to be in this, so it'll be very, very preliminary as we start this process. Yes?
Yeah. In the presentation you made to the Board of Selectmen, one of the things you said, you gave you get this on this sheet here, is that you indicated that additional funding source is not yet factored in.
Right.
That's correct.
And is that going to be the case with what?
That will still be the case because one of the funding sources is free cash, which is being submitted to the state this week. So that will not be in the plan, or we won't have decided how to potentially use that money yet because we're waiting for it to be certified. So
When do you expect that?
We're submitting it by Friday, so if all goes well, probably within 7 to 10 days, I would think.
Oh.
I know it won't take very long.
We're hoping to have it done by the end of the month, but once we've submitted it, it all depends on the Department of Revenue.
Yeah, sure.
But they have told me that they'll work on it very quickly. So.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so starting with the second page, the capital project record, starting with the fiscal 16 capital project recommendations from the revised and redrafted plan totaled $64.5 million. In the book, you'll see that we originally had programmed $61,666,000, so we have an increase of about $2.8 million through the plan. The next slide goes through, and what we've done is we've highlighted some of the major changes and just showed you where those changes were. And when Libby goes in depth, we'll give you a little more background on those changes. So bikes, paths, and sidewalks in the 2016 original plan had totaled $481,000. The request that came in for this year for bikes, paths, and sidewalks totaled $1.55 million, which was a rather substantial increase over that, but there have been some changes that, when presented, actually make some sense in the way they're doing things. So that's one of the larger increases. Town buildings increased $2.1 million from an original request of $21.4, with the new requests to $23.55 million.
I know we're going to go through this in detail, but I see sidewalks and crosswalks, etc. But boy, I'm getting pounded, and I don't. This is my first experience like you guys getting pounded by people who know that I'm on this committee about the cobblestones, about how bad they are. Is that
Well,
we're going to think about
as a
that
matter
at
of
some
fact,
point?
Greg and I, the assistant town manager, and I had a meeting with DPW yesterday, and we went over a number of cobblestone projects. They are working to figure out what locations to do, and just in case you want to know, the locations we were talking about were New Whale Street from about the tank farm to where Straight Work starts in Lower Main, Lower Main and Easy, Federal from Main to the post office, and Upper Main in the Orange Street area. So there are locations. Cobblestoning is extremely expensive. An area of perhaps half this table is, well, it's something like $250 per something square feet. It's quite costly. We have about $300,000 or $400,000 to spend on them for this fiscal year, and so the locations are being identified now. It's just we're not going to be able to do Main Street.
But a nice plan will be good. Thank you.
But a nice plan is coming. Yes.
People worried about roads.
So the last category that saw an increase was the non-building assets category, which increased by $1.85 million from the original presentation last year.
When we get into the detail, there is something that's probably going to come out, which is updating the stormwater master plan. And when we get to the specific projects, we can go over that.
Road improvements decreased by $1.5 million, and as we go through the detail, we'll explain how it was. It shows a decrease this year, but it's actually kind of a reconfiguration in the way that has been presented in the new plan. So I don't want people to think we're just ignoring roads.
No, it's boulevard.
So what we did, because the tax rate impact is always extremely important and is always a question that people ask, is Cinder and her staff actually ran the tax rate impact projections based solely on borrowing all $64.5 million with no smoothing techniques, with no offsets or anything of that nature in there. So we used the same points as we did in the prior plan, which was home valued at $500,000 and a home valued at $1.3 million to project what the impact would be. So if we borrowed all $64.5 million, the projected impact would be $179 or $180. For home valued at $1.3 million, the impact is projected to be $467. We only did the first year because that's when the largest portion of the debt would be on the tax rate, and then from there on out it would ratably go down. As we have noted in here, there have been no smoothing techniques, either through use of free cash to potentially offset some of this, through any other funding sources. And we also have not done any smoothing techniques in terms of when the borrowings would actually occur. Because with some of these substantially large projects that are in here, take for instance the fire department, the fire station, or the renovation of 20 South Water, or the new school, we would not borrow the full value of that project on day one. So there are techniques that we have at our disposal as these projects commence, or if they commence, that will smooth that impact out by taking bond anticipation notes before we roll and permanently borrow the debt, which does have a smoothing technique because you can carry a band for up to 5 years. So it does allow us to pay interest only at that point, but smooth it out as debt falls off. So there are some techniques that we can use with, in conjunction with First Southwest to actually kind of smooth the rate out. This just gives you all in today, this is what we believe the impact could be. Yes?
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. What you're saying is it's possible to take, with short-term borrowing, to pay interest only
Yes.
for 5 years.
Bands can be used up to 5 years. That's not what I wouldn't say that we would do that, but that's the length of time that you can use a band for before you have to permanently borrow it.
Okay, I wouldn't know what, okay, good.
Maybe I need to make sure I know what we're talking about too. So let's say we borrow 30 million for the
Okay.
school, for
Yeah.
example, and it takes, I don't know, 2 years to build, I don't know, a year to build.
Sure, that's
whatever. So you could just borrow what you need to pay for construction.
Right,
and all that
yes.
sort of thing.
Yes.
For
And
a
then
year
when
or
the project,
two,
yes.
and then the whole 30 million would have to be borrowed. Well, I guess you'd have to borrow the whole 30 million by the end of the 2 years if you.
You would borrow it at the end of the, you'd borrow it, you'd permanently borrow and roll the bands into a permanent borrowing, and typically it's done at the end of the construction process. You can do it at points throughout the process if rates are good, but it is a technique that we have to be able to use
Got it.
to kind of mitigate the impact and smooth it out a little bit. But
We
it has
talked-
it has not been reflected in this right here, right now.
Well, we talked a lot about smoothing last year, and we're just trying to make sure, since we're not financiers, that we understand it a little bit anyway. Thank you.
All right, are we ready to move on to the project sheet? Some of the other additional funding sources that are not factored in yet, as Brian mentioned, are free cash. There are also capital projects from prior years that are complete, that still have funding left, because not all of it was used. We're in the process of truing all of that up, so there will be an amount to put in for that. There are some other potential, there's an account called sales from the proceeds of real estate, and we have a good amount of money in that account. It's about $6 million, maybe a little more than that. But there are some policy issues that the Board of Selectmen need to work on as to what they want to spend those funds on, or do we want to put them in a capital project stabilization fund, for example, or put them towards specific projects. There was some thinking at one point that, for example, if we sold some land at Surfside, that the proceeds might be used towards the roads in Surfside. But that hasn't really been finalized. yet. But
Libby,
those are some of the-
is that restrictive? I mean, is that?
It is a little bit restrictive, and you'll see a note in our spreadsheet that explains the restriction.
Okay.
Basically, you can only use that funding for items that, well, first of all, if the property you sold had debt associated with it, the proceeds would have to be used first to pay off that debt. And it can only, the rest of it could only, we don't have very much of that situation, event. The rest of it can only be used for projects which are eligible for, I hope I'm saying this right, certain types of debt by law, what you can borrow for. Is that
You can only use the account for projects or items that you would typically be allowed to borrow for, and it has to be a borrowing that would occur for more than 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Is the, and under the laws, the restriction.
Restriction,
Yeah.
So the sheet I'm going off of looks like this, if you can possibly see it, so I think it's in your packet. And all of the backup to the sheet, I think has been emailed to, has it been emailed to them, the actual request?
The actual request just put on the installation for today. I'm going,
Oh,
week by
okay.
week, I'm gonna send them for every department individually.
Okay, so there's,
This is page one of that exhibit.
there's a little bit of a question here. Every item on this list has a backup sheet, if not more than one sheet. And only what was sent to you so far are the town administration items. So, question, do you want them all at once? Or do you want them week by week, depending on who's coming in?
I love them all at once.
I
Just
would
makes it
too.
easier.
Okay. Then you can look at them ahead of time. All right.
Thank you.
Starting on page 1,
Libby, what about grants?
what about grants?
You didn't mention anything.
Other ways of,
Other
sources
So
of
We don't
funding.
have too many grants that we're looking at. The one that might apply, and I personally doubt this will apply, if anything, is school building assistance.
Okay,
The
well,
school is in the process of, or actually maybe they have already applied for a school building assistance grant, but it's often based on need and financial standing and things like that. We're just not going to rise to that
yeah,
level.
okay.
And
So
there's so many other
forget
schools
about
that need
grants.
it. Yeah, if I come across one, I'll mention it, but I don't, there is one, and it's minor. It's about $140,000 for the easy
Okay,
to
I'm
vote.
gonna help it much,
But
You know,
there's not,
Kansu Spring would come from, isn't that in here too?
Kansu Springs
Would
is
be-
a borrowing, would likely be a borrowing.
Okay.
So there's not too many
Enough.
grants out there
Yeah.
for,
Yeah, other than the enterprise funds, but as far
other
as,
than the enterprise funds.
but
for
general fund is.
Mostly airport.
Yeah. What about, and also revolver funds?
Yeah, I'm not considering that a grant, but there is. a
No, I don't
revolving-
either, that's
Yeah.
just another source.
We did try to identify that. Waterways was really the only one that had a capital item in it,
Okay,
and that is listed in here.
good.
Okay, upgrade of UPS and data center for police, that's uninterrupted power system. There's a lot of technology that has been acquired throughout the town, and a lot of it is in the basement of this building, and it powers almost everything throughout the town. And there was initially, when this building was built, a somewhat different plan for town IT, which got modified as we moved along. So the original UPS in the data center was meant for less than what it's being used for now. So there is a need for an upgrade. Police and fire have some server and PC replacements. And these types of things, and you're going to see this in town IT as well. Every year, probably, or every other, they're going to have some server, PC, desktop, printer, all of that type of replacement. Because these things, I mean, I think we all know, they just get upgraded so quickly. So, actually, police and fire, I'm not sure have had anything in the last couple of years, so that's for public safety, basically. Police and Marine, renovation of the town pier, office building, and public restrooms. Now, this is something we want to look at a little bit more, $1.2 million. The bathrooms in that building, and I think some of you went down there last year to look at them, are not in good condition at all. There are, A, not enough of them,
Yeah.
and B, they've been flooded out, obviously, many times. The flooring's been replaced, the walls have been replaced, some of the fixtures have been replaced, but the building needs to be raised if we're going to have decent bathrooms in there, and it's costly to do that. Now, an idea came up at the board meeting, some of you heard it, from one of the selectmen who said, if the plan is to move the finance offices out of 37 Washington Street, maybe we convert that building into the Marine Department / public bathrooms. Now, if you go down and look at them, they're not right across the street from each other directly.
No.
The 37 Washington is a little bit farther down, and it would require some substantial renovation because of floodplain issues, and the interior is not at all configured for bathrooms or marine offices. So there would need to be some substantial work done, but it is something to look at. There is a bit of a timing issue too, because these bathrooms, obviously they're not going to get done for next summer, and they can probably squeak through another summer, but they're crappy.
They're bad, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen
And
it.
so I don't think we want to wait too long. So I'm going to have the chief and some other people look at the possibility of the 37 Washington Street again. So for now, this is in like this, but it may or may not change. We're talking about it. Okay?
Okay, that's,
Police Marine, town pier timber repairs. The idea here, and I think hopefully you all recall, within the last couple of years, there were some severe, at least 2 severe storms that had a physical impact on the town pier. And there are a number of timbers that need to be replaced, and they're expensive. Obviously, we want to try to do the work when other waterfront facilities are getting maintained or repaired, like the boat basin or yacht club or whoever. So this would be funded from the Waterways Improvement Fund. And the idea is that we had some money already for this fiscal year and maybe even the prior, I can't recall right at the moment, but the idea is to put the funding in to really get us up to a good place with the condition of the town pier, and then to have an annual maintenance plan going forward of probably $20,000 or $30,000 a year, so that we don't get stuck every few years with a really big repair bill, that it's, more like every 20 years. So that's the idea there. And for people who aren't clear on what the Waterways Improvement Fund is, that fund is funded by boat excise tax. A portion of the boat excise tax goes into this local fund. The rest of it goes to the state. What else goes in there? Moorings. Other revenue that the town generates, and it's a statutory fund that municipalities are allowed to establish and spend from within the limits of the law. So it's really for waterways improvement. We have used it for some water quality issues from time to time, but we're trying to get back to using it for actual waterways things. DPW, Consu Springs Harbor Outfall Stormwater Improvements. This has been on the table for a while. It is a project that was identified in a prior year stormwater mapping plan, and it was viewed as a high priority. It is a big ticket item, $3.5 million, and it involves a culvert and some other stuff, and the DPW director can explain it when she comes into the
Yeah,
project.
I just wonder if it's been out there for so long. It's been out there at $3.5 million too.
Out of this, or
It's
is it?
part of the plan,
Okay,
but it's not actually this. This is another component of the plan. This is the big component of the plan.
okay.
Another place, for example, was Orange Street, kind of near the Island Home. If you recall,
Yeah.
there used to be a massive
Yeah,
pump
we
there,
did something there too. I
and
recall.
that was another one.
This has been, we've had this on the thing for, what, 5, 6 years?
Maybe not that long, but
Seems
at least
like it.
4,
Yeah.
probably.
Will the bike path potential, they're gonna do a culvert, something
It will
to
not
fix,
affect the bike path project.
but will the bike path project be able to take care of some of this, or part of it?
I don't think they're very related.
Okay,
And there was a suggestion by a group that the bike path project and this be combined, that would
complicated.
complicate things.
So you
and
want to keep
jeopardize-
them apart.
We want to keep them apart.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not really the same project.
Different.
The next item, update stormwater master plan. This is something that I think we're probably going to take out pending some additional information. There was
Good
some
idea.
comment
Yeah.
at the board meeting about it.
Yeah,
That it's too much money and we ought to deal with the projects we have on the drawing table before we update our plan. So
Great idea.
Baxter Road, alternative access construction. This can potentially be repaid through betterments to the abutters who would benefit from an alternative access. At some point when planning comes in, Andrew will be able to explain this better than I, but the idea is that when and if Baxter Road fails due to erosion, that we would be able to construct an alternative access fairly quickly so that there is one. There right now are discussions and negotiations occurring with the affected abutters, and that is not complete at the moment. We're working on a kind of a memorandum of agreement with them, and it is not quite done yet.
I saw it staked out, you had it staked out for a long period of time, so you could, people, the neighbors, et cetera, butters could see it.
Yep.
So they know, so therefore they're in a pretty good position to discuss that with you guys.
You'll also see, perhaps, if you're out on Baxter Road, there are some stakes along the east side that are meant to mark any change to the bluff. So our emergency management coordinator, Dave Fonzino, goes out there once a week to measure. And it hasn't changed in a while, but who knows? Boulevard reconstruction. This is probably phase one of the reconstruction of several roads in the Surfside area, including Boulevard, Okawa, a section of Lover's Lane, Monahans, and possibly Clifford Street. All of those roads right at the moment are private roads. We had money appropriated last year for the costs associated with taking those roads, and that is underway right now. So we wouldn't actually begin this project until we own the roads.
Well, does that mean it's that maybe that won't happen then?
I think we're going to own the roads by the end of this
I would
year.
think, yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm hoping to get across to the abutters is the minute we own them does not mean
Right.
that the roads are going to be reconstructed in the next few hours.
They know that.
Good.
Libby, I noticed that was one of the big decreases you had over our
Yep.
last.
So I think we had 3 million in.
3.5, I
We decided
think, yeah.
to phase it and
Yeah.
do maybe one road a year.
Okay.
Going back to Baxter, will we just put in the, kind of a dirt road, or does that include paving?
It would be gravelled. I think the discussion was
Less
gravel.
expensive
I don't
way
think
to go.
paving was
Okay. Would be more
in the
expensive.
plan. I think it was gravel.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, can I just say one thing about Boulevard just for a minute? This has been a huge, long, ongoing Surfside Area Plan Association, Plan Work Group, Mike, I think Chris McGee. The original plan called for 70-30, 30% paid by, including Woodland,
If we
Skyline.
were not going to own them,
No, if we were.
that's not my understanding.
When's the last time I talked to him? Chris?
When I talked to Tom Quigley.
Tom Quigley, okay, either one, same thing.
Quite
yeah.
often.
Yeah. We shouldn't do it until the butters pay 30%, at least. It's, the benefit to everybody out there is huge. I know the lots are big, there's not that many people. We sat down for years dealing with this, and the town should pay significantly for it, I agree, but the benefit is massive out there for them. So,
I don't
my
disagree with any
opinion
of
of
that.
that.
But in my most recent discussions with Tom and Chris, who came in to see me at the beginning of the summer, it sounded to me like they were not interested in that anymore. And there would be no way to force that. They would have to agree to it. So
1 million is
they
cheap,
feel that,
by the way.
I mean, I'm not really defending them,
Yeah.
but they feel that they've raised a lot of money and fixed the really bad areas, and they don't want to keep doing it, and they think the town is responsible because there's so much public use for the airport.
True, but.
Anyway.
Yeah.
That was a discussion though, and it was good,
Not gonna win that
they
one.
got brought up. Road repairs and maintenance, $900,000. This is something that's been in the budget for, this is maybe the third or fourth year, of about this amount of money. We had a pavement management study done in 2007, I believe, and it recommended about a $1.3 million annual appropriation for road repair. We haven't reached that with capital, but in the between the DPW budget, Chapter 90 funds, which are funds that go to all towns based on a formula of how many miles of road you have, and this amount, we're there, or maybe even a little more. We're right about there. And there are a number of roads that have been reconstructed, repaved. If anybody's been out to Nantucket lately, they were finishing it up yesterday. There's been some work on Hummock Pond Road. I think the main roads that had disrepair over the last couple of years have mostly been addressed. There may be some, well, there are some that are continuing to be in the works, and the DPW has a list of the roads that they're gonna get to this year, but this would be ongoing, just maintenance and repair of the roads.
Is this beyond chapter 90?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have you don't look at that, I consider that a separate funding source.
It is a separate
Right.
funding source.
You didn't note it there, that's why I had a little
No,
note.
it's not meant to, it's not meant to offset this necessarily. What I mean is, the 900,000 would entirely come from the town. Chapter 90 is a $700,000 or $800,000 additional receipt from the state.
Okay, we had some years, as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory tends to fog a little, that we only used Chapter 90 funds.
We may have done that back in 2007-8,
Yeah.
when we had an economic decline and we didn't appropriate any money, through capital anyway.
Mhm.
There was probably a little bit of the DPW budget, but yes, I agree. Chapter 90's fluctuated too.
Yeah. So this is in addition to Chapter 90?
Yes, as it was last year and the year before.
This is good. Is this something that we can, through planning, occasionally get money when we don't have something to target it for, like we used to do with the bike path thing? It's kind of phased out now.
I'm not sure.
We used to get funding for bike path that was, you could get, you know, an applicant to pay for something that isn't even in their neighborhood, theoretically.
Yeah.
And we've been looking for something, and I'm just curious if this is set up that way, and I don't know if it was.
Well,
I
I
think
think
we have to go
there's
to town meeting for this
a
or something. Not sure.
communication connection, hopefully, between DPW and planning
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. This is important. We should put an asterisk next to this for Andrew, because this is,
He and Mike Burns and Silvio and Kara, they've all discussed this
Okay.
before. Chapter 90 does have some restrictions. You can use it for bike paths, you can use it for roads. We find that you can only use $50,000 a year for it for cobblestones. You can buy some road-related equipment with it. We do have planned to buy a grader, a used grader that's got very low mileage on it. We talked about, I think, a bike path sweeper was partially paid for it last year out of Chapter 90. We also talked a little bit about design money for a new garage at DPW, which they desperately need. But we thought we were getting too far off the track of roads, so we abandoned that.
That's a good point.
yeah.
Replacement street sweeper. These street sweepers take a lot of abuse because there is so much sand on the roads, and they do need to periodically be replaced. So it was time to replace this one. Replacement pickup trucks with plows. There are two of them. One is bigger than the other, but we combined them into one amount so that, you know, if one turned out to be more, we have money. It's a little bit more flexible this way. Replacement wood chipper, again, when Kara comes in, she can go over this a bit, but the wood chipper that the DPW uses now is quite old. Replacement parts are no longer available. There are safety concerns with it, so it really does need to get replaced. So that's DPW. DPW and Emergency Management, repairs to Easy Street bulkhead. We applied for what in my mind I had somehow thought was a grant of $1.2 million, but it's actually a partial grant and a loan. We haven't signed the agreement yet, but it would be $1.2 million to repair the Easy Street bulkhead, and Nat probably knows actually a little bit more about this than I do. The idea would be that, I mean, the bulkhead itself, I don't even know what
Wood.
it was last
Not even
worked
sheet
on,
metal.
but it's really got to get fixed. I mean, it is a
Is that why it keeps undermining the bricks on the other side?
Yep.
Yeah.
It would be the top of it, that metal top of it would be raised up a little bit. It would be in compliance with floodplain rules. So the grant itself, if I'm remembering it sort of correctly, is around $140,000. That's an outright grant. The rest of it would be a loan. Brian and I talked a little bit yesterday about what the debt service on the loan would be. We do have to go to town meeting to authorize the borrowing, but it's about $36,000 a year or so.
Yes.
And we think we can probably fund that within the operating budget. So,
But we still got to go to town meeting.
but we still got to go to town meeting.
Mhm.
And this is a state
So this is
loan.
next fall.
This is at least next fall, maybe even,
Oh, my God.
There's a lot of permits that are gonna have to be obtained.
Okay.
But the permits shouldn't really be that difficult, because it's not.
Don't we have a
really-
Chapter 91 license for this, like already, kind of, or something?
Yeah, you have to,
Still
which
have to.
will help a lot, and it's also, it's already a disturbed area, it's an
Mm.
actively used area, so it's not like it's out in somewhere else where there's eelgrass beds and shelters and stuff like that.
Yes, if you have a chapter 91 on it, all you have to do is write a letter to the state, ask them to replace and repair existing what's there, as long as it sits in the same footprint, and the approval is
Quick.
almost
And
instantaneous.
actually, I need to talk to Dave about it, but he may have already done that, it may have been a requirement in the grant loan thing, I'm not really sure.
Sure.
But it wouldn't be before next fall, because this won't even go to town meeting until spring, and then we have to borrow, and then we have to put it out to bid, and I don't think we're gonna do this work in the summer.
No.
So we're gonna have to hopefully are okay throughout the winter.
Libby, when you say you're going to fund it within the operating budget, you don't mean free cash, you're talking about just part of the operating budget?
Correct.
Yep, okay.
And I think if I may, I think it behooves us in the town to coincide that work with any bulkhead repairs or timber repair you're doing, just because AGM is,
Yeah.
as
Yep.
an entity, I mean, their startup costs to come here are 15 to 20K, so you might as well do it all at once.
This is the problem with procurement, though. I've said this for years. We do the same thing at the steamship. You can't get the same company always, even though they're right. Yeah, I just saw AGM the other day get off the boat, bang, right out, doing whatever they're doing. And thinking about this stuff as a private sector thinker, oh, they're already here, that startup thing, that's the catch. I also talked to Dave about this the other day, and this is, I keep injecting planning into this, but this is a 100-year fix. When this gets fixed, we'll all be dead. This is going to go on for 100 years. I personally have asked them through planning before and then the other day to move the bulkhead out a little bit, to add some land to that spot.
That would take a redo of your 91, which,
He said it wasn't that hard. He said there's an amount they can move, like up to a certain number of inches.
but then when you do that,
Because you know all
you
this
have-
already,
yeah,
because you had
if
to
you
do
do
it.
that, you come up every 10 years for renewal, and someone could say something, and it's more difficult. It could be done, but you look at your chapter 91, it will clearly tell you if it's renewable or not. And if it's not renewable, then I think it's crazy to get into a market that is renewable, because all you need is a taxpayer or some private entity saying, that's killed my business or
Well,
killed my home.
the reason I brought it up is because there's two reasons. Mrs. Dealey's has moved out, and you can see where hers comes in. It's going to be tying in, and it's almost like set up already to be out a little more. We can widen sidewalks, because it's a horrifying sidewalk situation before and after the bump out. And at the same time, the bump out, we would be adding land. If we ever wanted to reduce the size of the bump out and add land on the other side, we would be able to tie this all in as one thing down the road. But I understand how complicated this stuff is. If we can't do it, we can't do
Yeah,
it.
just look at your existing plan. If you have an as-built of what's there, who knows, maybe that wasn't built in the right place, and the one that was approved years and years ago may benefit us.
Mm.
So that's where I would start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, planning DPW, extension of multi-use path, Hummock Pond Road bike path to Mount Vernon Street.
Mm.
So this would be from the, well, depending on how you look at it, the end of the existing new Hummock Pond bike path along Milk Street to Mount Vernon. It's $530,000. We could partially offset this with our Hummock Pond Road bike path gift account, which has about $140,000 in it. So plans are pretty well drawn up for this already.
That's good.
And it's supported by the Hummock Pond bike path.
Yeah. That's a,
Prospect Street sidewalk, end of okay, so this is end of the existing bike path on Prospect, you can visualize that, to
Yep.
Quaker Road, through the intersection, well,
Good.
through the intersection.
Yeah.
through the intersection to Vestal Street
Gotcha.
along Quaker.
Yeah.
So not down by the cemetery.
No.
But,
No.
Vestal.
Yeah.
Over on the other side?
It would be on the
Yeah,
other
that's
side
what
of the
you
street
take.
as the existing bike path.
Well, you take it down
still
by
have
the
to cross.
cemetery, huh?
There's some very tricky right-of-way issues on the same side of the street. There's poles in the way. I don't think there's any poles that need to be moved on the other side,
Not on the Quaker side, no.
on the Prospect Street.
There is on Prospect,
There is.
a couple.
Okay, but not as many.
And the one fire hydrant, I believe, yes.
So we've been discussing this for quite a while too, and it would be, the extension, there's a little bit of a sidewalk, kind of, on the other side of the street. So this would be more of an established sidewalk on that side of the street.
8 feet, 6 feet, state regs, any involved?
Well, no, because we're not taking state money for this, but I'm not sure what the thinking is. It's probably not 8 feet,
Probably
Okay.
you know?
Yeah, can I bring up this? Oh, my God. I'm sorry, everyone. This is another, I guess I'd call it a safety
Yeah.
improvement.
not. Absolutely.
This is what this is. This is
Yeah.
not a path or a sidewalk. There's going to be a little discussion. I don't know, it's not in here because I'm not sure how we're paying for this, but there's going to be a path, there's 2 established paths that go up through Prospect Park now.
Yep.
This is a different thing, but it's part of the whole package to get people
Yeah, I've seen the plan.
to Joy Street. You saw the pictures already? Oh, good. Okay, good.
Well, we've already approved some funding for part of that.
This is because the subdivision is paying for the fixing of the road that is, there's an old way that's legal, it goes up behind by the Catholic Church entrance cemetery.
Yeah.
This here is, we've been talking about this in right-of-way committee, I think, since the day I got appointed. It was 100 years ago, it seems now. But there's a lot of, as Libby said, there's a lot of right-of-way issues on Prospect Street that can be, we've got more room than you think. Like on the right side of the road, as you're going towards Quaker, there's curbing that's sticking way out in the road. That could be all brought, that's all in the right-of-way, been there for years. And subsequently, on the other side is where we need to focus our attention on making a real sidewalk from essentially Stojack's house
Yeah.
to past Glidden's, which has been improved by the private owner. There's brick underneath that grass.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's just there, it's just covered up. So it can be fixed, it's just this is what this is for.
So actually, is this sidewalk, I thought Brenda said it was on the other side of the street, but is it on the same side
As
as
the
the
path.
existing bike path?
Yes.
Okay, so that is gonna be tricky,
It's gonna be, as far as I know it is,
yeah.
I mean, unless something's changed, that's what it's supposed to be.
Just so I understand, now, if you do it on the same side, you know, the extension of the bike path, basically.
Essentially.
You know, it's really messy in there, so would you have to widen the road to the other side?
Right, that was the
And
big.
that's why the right-of-way is
There's already
important.
quite a bit of widening already done,
Mhm.
once you get past the spot at Mill Street.
Mhm.
It's a lot wider, and then bang, when you get to Paul Morris's house, it sort of
Almost hit
comes
somebody.
back out again. But there's a little bit of room there. It's gonna be, it's just formalizing a sidewalk and making it a little bit safer for bikes, but bikes are gonna end up going up the other way too. So it's gonna be, this is just a safety improvement.
I think
Yeah.
even cars, trucks,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's tough.
tough in there. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's kamikaze.
ADA improvements, these would be curb cuts and things around town. We consulted with the Commission on Disability about this. This was an annual appropriation some number of years ago, and it fell out because we had brought ourselves up to much more of a, not really a standard, but we had done a lot of curb cuts and things around town. It's time to revisit them now, because some of them have worn out or worn away or was used, sidewalks or need to be.
Is this in-house? Is Paul going to be able to do this stuff, or is this something like
I
hiring
think
someone?
some of it might be in-house and some of it would be hired out.
This is good stuff. This is part of some of the street and sidewalk. Thank you all.
Is it all downtown?
It's all downtown.
Good.
Sparks Ave sidewalk improvements, roundabout to Rotary. This is a tier 2 categorized project, which basically means that it would be good to have this, and if we don't do something sort of soon, then it's going to become a real problem, but we could defer it for a year or two. If you can visualize from the roundabout to the Rotary, this is the sidewalk on the right as you're heading out of town, It's crumbly, it's narrow, it does get a lot of use.
Yeah.
So.
A lot of use, yeah.
Can I interrupt one more time? I'm so sorry. There's $175,000 sitting somewhere from the Craig original plan, the J. McKinnon Stop and Shop now, they own it,
Okay.
but ask Andrew about that. That was targeted either for this or some sightline improvements at the, Pleasant Street. When you pull out of Williams Lane, you can't see a thing. It was supposed to be realigning. It was for that area. And I think that we talked about this, formalizing this existing, I guess I would call it a sidewalk, but it really should be a bike path, 8 feet at
This?
least. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
what we already have on Sparks is that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
What's already there.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's.
From the roundabout to
There's
the
something about this with that project. I just don't know the details.
Okay, they've never mentioned that when we talked about this project, but I
Yeah.
can follow up. with
Yeah,
them.
they may not have had to write the check yet because it has never been
Ask
done.
for it.
Right, but it is in the decision, I know
I
that.
see, okay.
Okay?
I'll repeat what I've said before, because of the bank and, all the way up to the post office, that whole side, it's just, to walk is awful.
That was part of that one
Very,
too, we talked about it.
I don't know, this is on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
Well, isn't Stop and Shop going to be doing some improvements there? As part of it?
When they come in for another plan, there's gonna be more, let's just say improvements required. But as of now, there's 175, I believe it's 175. I just don't know exactly how that all ended up. So,
Bartlett, we're ready to move on. Bartlett
Yes.
Road, multi-use path improvements, from Surfside Road to Mizzenmast.
Same thing.
That path, again, is very heavily used, it's way too narrow, it's got way too many areas where, in between the road and the path, it's dirt, so
Needs
dirt
to be
gets,
bermed.
and sand gets all over it all the time, it's a little bit
That's heavily used by
unsafe.
the
So this,
Very
when you say
heavily
improvements, you're talking about widening and
We're
also,
talking
of
about a
course,
little widening.
and resurfacing,
berms,
I assume.
Resurfacing,
yeah.
That's the result of what we used to do still, similar to Sparks, similar to Hooper Farm. We
Yeah.
just didn't do it. The 8-foot minimum thing is recent.
Yes.
So everybody should know that. Never really was like a set rule to do that.
And I think around the Mizzenmast area, it does widen out because there was state funding for that, so it had to be wider. This isn't really state funding, but it clearly needs to be wider.
Pulpus Road
Absolutely.
bike path needs to be wider too. I mean, it is so heavily used in the summer, the strollers, and it is,
Yeah.
I think it's 6 feet.
8.
Is it 8?
Yeah. Did it?
You gotta
I don't
dig
have
up
a
the
problem.
grass
I
to
use it
get
all
the
the
8.
time, so.
Yeah.
There were people who wanted that path narrower,
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they didn't want it. I know, yeah.
or didn't want it, exactly. All right, moving into town administration, repairs to town building. We have a kind of a list of items that we're talking about, and they range from potential lighting replacements to window replacements. There's some windows that are rotting out, brickwork, things like that. This is the main town building.
Mhm.
We also have an asbestos issue, and we haven't totally worked it in. We're going to try to work it into the 250. There's also some HVAC improvements in this. We just had an asbestos report done. Not to get into a lot of detail about this, but there's some asbestos in the ceiling, and it's fine if it's not disturbed, but we've been talking about replacing our lighting. We have mostly LED lights throughout the building now, but the problem with the town building lights is, you see how these are recessed, the town building ones are not, and it's been very difficult, and it's ongoingly difficult to get covers for these lights. When the lights were initially installed in 1965, the covers were great, and they came with the lights, and as the years went on, they don't manufacture those covers anymore, so we had to get them fabricated. They were a complete fail, and they fall down from time to time. I have found a light cover broken on my desk chair before when I came to work, so it's a good
Who's
thing I wasn't
responsible for
there.
that?
Well,
No, I'm
it's
kidding.
just,
It's a
so
joke.
the
It's a joke. You don't have to answer it.
solution would be to do the recessed lighting, but there is this asbestos removal problem that's gonna have to occur, so we've kind of mulled over if we ever hopefully, we will be redoing 20 South Water. Perhaps we can work in some of this stuff at the same time. But anyway, that, if we can get it in for not too much, do sort of spot asbestos removal here and there, then.
So we need to put recessed lights, you have to get rid of the asbestos,
Right.
essentially.
Mhm.
I mean, that's something we should do. If we're staying at the town building, we should be
Yeah,
doing this stuff.
exactly.
So, that's crazy.
Design for replacement admin building at 2 Fairgrounds Road. So this is the plus building.
Yeah.
And the idea would be, first of all, going back, the idea never was for that building to be a permanent office building for the town. It wasn't designed for that initially, even by National Grid, Nantucket Electric. There's a huge amount of wasted space and energy use in that building because it's not an office building. It is a utility building. I encourage you to take a walk through there if you haven't been in the back. It's
It's a
a
garage.
nightmare. Yes, thank you.
Steel.
So the idea would be to demolish the building and resite it to make better use of the property in general for parking and whatever else, and have an actual office building there with probably a basement for storage. The energy efficiency would be much improved. So this would be the design, and I've explained in my info sheet where the number came from. If you want to go over that, we can, but it's all in there.
I'm just trying to remember what we paid for the land out on
15.
Fairgrounds Road. 15 mil?
I think it was 15, wasn't it?
Yep, and we're.
Best 15 we ever spent.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one question about this, Libby? Didn't we do something with, wasn't the guy Abraham or something? That we like already kind of looked at this and kind of,
We did a
think
space
his name was
needs
Abraham,
analysis,
if I'm
and
not
we used a
mistaken.
group called, it wasn't Abraham, but
Oh.
it did begin with an
okay.
A. And they looked at the building to see if it could be, rehabbed, and the recommendation was, don't even think about it. It's not, the part of it's steel, it just,
Rehabbing is going to cost.
Well, it's steel and cement, which doesn't wear out, but I understand why they say that. It's today's standards, you can't fix it the same way you would
the
if
code,
it was
I mean,
wooden or something.
it's not up to code now
Yeah.
for office space.
But is it gonna, is the idea to stay in there and build a new building while they're in there, right, isn't it? Or are we relocating and
We
demolishing?
have to look at that through the
Okay,
design.
so that's all
process.
part of this money.
If they were to be relocated, I think they would be relocated to trailers. They're not gonna be relocated to some other building.
Temporary
Unless
building, that's why I'm asking.
Thinking ahead, there's lots of things tying into each other, unless it somehow worked out that 20 South Water got renovated, finance moved in there, and then we moved Plus back in there. But let me just tell you,
That's
that's
crazy.
gonna be a nightmare, because
Parking.
when Plus was in there before, it was a nightmare. Parking
Yeah.
and space, and
Mm.
just put them in trailers and be done with it.
Yeah, I agree.
It's good enough for the kids, it's good enough for our town.
That's right.
That, Libby, this 400,000, which is a lot for just design, does that include construction drawings, or is that
Yes,
just?
that would be the construction drawings as well.
Okay, now, I've always been a little bit antsy about having construction drawings, paying for construction drawings before we get approval of the town meeting. Because if the town meeting turns it down, then we've got a lot of construction drawings we paid for.
Well, we could probably what we would do is come up with some conceptual options.
Yeah.
The engineers could come up with an estimated construction cost. We go to town meeting with that, and then this appropriation of $400,000 wouldn't have been entirely used, and then you use the rest of it to complete the drawings.
That,
You're going to have some conceptual
Okay.
drawings.
so that would be written into the bid for the 400,000?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
that's kind of where I was getting at.
yeah, that would be.
You get a little, but yeah, okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay.
So if they didn't do them, then we wouldn't pay for them. When you say it's written into the bid.
Well, right. If there's work they haven't done that they would do as part of the contract, then we wouldn't pay for them.
Yeah,
Pay for it.
okay, that's what we talked about, written into the contract, yeah.
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 20 South Water Street renovation and expansion. I think you all probably recall, this has been on the drawing board for 2 or 3 years now, and it actually was almost on the town meeting warrant, and there were some concerns expressed, and until we had a long-term capital financing plan, we should not proceed with one project sort of on its own. So We have a long-term capital financing plan now, and something has got to be done with this building. It is in poor shape, it cannot be used by the public. The only office in there right at the moment is the sheriff's office, and I can't even believe they like it in there. The roof is in bad shape, the drainage in there is very bad, the bricks need work. If we're going to keep town offices, municipal offices downtown, which is most of what I hear people want to do, then this building has got to get done. And the cost is only increasing annually.
Libby, the 7,000, which we had when we did the original work.
This is the option that, well, I forget the letter of it, there was like A, B, C, D, and E.
Yeah.
It was adding on to the,
I don't remember what letter.
it was
I can look it up, but
the
it's-
most expensive option, but it was adding on to the building.
It was adding on to the
Making
building,
it
it
more
was bringing
usable.
finance in. it was
Taking
bringing-
out
East Chestnut.
yeah,
the
the little house right
cabin.
there, and that was taking down that little house there and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and expanding it. So that was, I think, that would have been C, I think, or something.
It might have been C. It was 6.7 at the time, and so
Okay.
I made up an inflationary number of $300,000.
Now, one of the things that if you look at that from a cost a square foot, okay, and this is just another thing we have to talk about today, just something I want to throw into the pot. It gets up to almost $1,000 a foot, okay, for the cost of renovating that building. If you look at what we're talking, you're talking about out here at Two Fairgrounds, the cost of that building at somewhere around $450 a foot. What you're saying basically is that for the luxury of putting that downtown, it's going to cost the taxpayers about $3.5 million for no other reason, just for the luxury of putting it down there.
Well, I would say two things to that. It's partially the luxury of putting it downtown, but it's also renovating an old building.
That's what I was just going to ask.
If we could demolish that building
Yeah.
and build it new, we wouldn't be paying $1,000 per square foot. We'd be paying less than that.
So the historic preservation aspect is adding a lot.
Yeah, I won't go
That's
into
what I
it, but
was
we
gonna
went
ask.
through a whole rigmarole
Yeah.
with HDC and Community Preservation Committee about this building. We were told to submit a demo application for 20 South Water because it would be approved. No, it was not approved.
Wasn't it declared not a historical building?
That's what I remember too.
That's what I remember, but then they changed their mind or something.
There was a lot of.
That's a stretch.
There was a lot of TR going on with this.
In any
I
case,
remember.
that's really the big reason for the cost. It's renovating an existing building. I don't believe it is historic, but if it's going to be downtown, it's going to have to look.
It was at 26 this was built? Academy Hill era.
I think 20-something, 5.
Well, the only thing I'm saying is that no one talks about that part of it. You know,
Well, we had a lot of discussion about that.
we did. I'm talking
early
about
on.
in the public. So when people say, "Well, do you want to do that?" Everybody says, "Well, sure, we want to do that."
Yeah.
And I say, and I say to them, "Well, is it worth $3.5 million to do that?" Well, then they look at me and say, "Well, no." Well, I said,
Well,
"Well,
it's just the same as the
I
feeling
mean,
problem.
that's in essence, that's what you're talking about." And so I think the issue is, you know, we're going to get into this later, and I don't want to belabor the point now, but I think that's an issue that's going to be front and center in the town meeting part of this. And so,
Yeah. Early on, when we were working on this building, that was one of our talking points, that
Keep it
it
downtown.
cost, well, to keep it
Oh, it's
downtown, but it
expensive.
costs money to keep it downtown.
that's right. And
Well,
and in
and-
my
and-
view, that's,
A lot of money.
yeah, a lot of money.
And the town employees are not there now anyway, already. So anyway, as John said, we don't need to belabor it now because we're going to get into it, but later. Peter, you have a question?
I suggest the term we use is a locational premium on the property,
Yeah.
where you
That's a
can
good
say, you know,
term.
there may be
Our
others
wordsmith over
in the
here.
private
What was
sector.
that word that
No, but I
Carrie
mean,
used,
the way to
value
understand it is there may
enhancement or
be actors in the private sector who would say, I'm willing to pay that locational premium. That's the best place to have a new hotel, bed and breakfast,
That's right.
historic, whatever. That's the way to think about
Yeah,
it.
what Bruce Percy
My
could
my
do with
question
that spot.
is costs increasing annually. I'm just wondering, what are the extraordinary driving forces that would cause us to pay more attention here than to everything where cost is increasing on all of the items? Just so I understand what's causing the cost increase.
Well, I think it's just a cost of delay.
Deterioration.
And the longer you wait to do a big project like this, the more expensive it's going to be. The fire station,
Right.
as you know, has
Yeah.
increased.
But is that because things are rotting away as we wait?
Well, I think it's partially that, but also the construction companies are just going to charge more every year. It's more
Okay.
expensive to get here and bring all their stuff here and mobilize every year.
And then the other question, which is a tough one, and you may not be able to answer it. Do you have any ballpark idea of, can you put a range on the annual cost increase? I'm asking this just because I want to be able to
No,
say,
I can't. But
1%, 5%,
I could talk to Mark about that because I think he had the architects do just that in his new number. So we could probably apply the same logic to.
Yeah, just something so we have a ballpark idea that it's, maybe in the range of 1 to 3% a year or 2 to 5%. So when one makes the case that you need to do it now, the downside is if you don't do it now,
Well,
think of it as a X to Y% surcharge.
that's true with everything.
Well, I know it's true of everything, but
True with
that's
the
what I'm
whole,
trying to get at.
it's true with everything in that thing.
But if it's more true of this, of these two projects, the big ticket ones, I'd like to be able to say these are standing out in the sense that they're unusually sore thumbs.
We can talk about it later, but I don't
This
agree
is-
with your premise at all.
Can I just ask one question? And this is a really good discussion. We haven't talked about this in a while, so it's in the paper, public stuff. But this whole moving back to town thing, we need to keep that in perspective. We're out here now. We're sitting out here, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going back to town with things that require a bazillion cars a day to come in and get a permit. But I look at this police station as a 40-year-older town building, essentially. I mean, that's what we have. We have not a single parking space. Well, actually, we do for you and a couple other people. But seriously, we have not, this was put there, when there was 25 cars in Nantucket,
Yeah.
okay? Does this include, first of all, is there any grant funding because it's historic? No, okay.
Well, we don't.
Have we talked to any of our, let's say, community funder types around here about this? The need to keep it in town should grab a hold of the heartstrings of some of the check writers around here, I would think. Number 3, does this include NERDA, the wooden, as it goes back, it gets more wooden. What are we doing back there? Is this part of it? Or is the visitor services and NERDA building part
I
separate?
think visitor service was not part of it.
But NERDA must be.
There it is, yeah.
Okay, because that's wood as we continue back. So
Yeah, I
that should
think
be
I-
sort of like just new construction. I would think that you'd be able to demolish that part.
I'd have to go back and look at the plan. I just don't
Yeah,
remember.
the design of it is to demolish the NERDA building
Yeah,
and then expand out
Yes.
with a new building.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have some rough plans for this.
Oh,
Okay.
good, not rough. They're
I didn't know we did.
Paid
'Cause
I
I
have
money
a,
for it.
Okay, good.
Study that's about literally
All
this
right.
thick.
Yeah, I got it right here.
Because as I recall, it was the second floor issue was like the big hang-up.
Well, there's gonna have to be an elevator.
We couldn't make a second floor with this building or
No,
something.
we can make a second
Okay.
floor, but it has to have an elevator.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. It's gonna, that's part of
the design includes a second floor.
And I guess my-
Floors
A
going
full
out.
second floor, much more than it is right
Yeah,
now.
there's a second floor in there now, if you want to call it that.
I think we're gonna have to come back to this one because there's a lot of issues.
No, and the other
Storage
thing,
is
too,
another issue, blah, blah, blah. Let's
What-
keep on going.
What John is saying about town meeting, my point would be, when you have to debate these things, 2 fairgrounds versus this, I would look at those two. If I was a voter that was trying to decide, I would say, okay, which one's more important? You know what I mean? And what's going on down there? Can it just stay there for a while versus out here? That's kind of how I would look
Yeah.
at it.
Me too.
All right.
Okay, what's next? Continuation of electronic data management system. You may recall last year we had something in the capital or in the budget for records management plan. We've worked through that, we've engaged a vendor to, what they're basically going to do is scan everything, and a system will be established so that all the files are centralized, they're named, they're searchable, they're easy to find. We've started training this week, but in order to have, I think we're doing 2 or 3 departments in this fiscal year, and continuing with more departments in the next fiscal year.
Is it centralized somewhere?
It
Is
will
a
be.
scanner somewhere?
There will be more than one scanner. I
We
think.
have our own scanners, and then they gave us a free desktop scanner for the departments that don't have one.
Okay.
So
And
the
then we still-
capital includes buying another one.
Okay.
It also required the purchase of a server, which I think we have now.
Someplace to store it, yeah.
Okay.
Does that resolve some of Catherine's issues?
Oh, no.
I don't think so.
Well, I didn't mean all of her issues, but I mean the storage issue.
No.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe it would.
Well, it's forcing her to get rid of her stuff in the attic.
This is going to involve, this is going to take a while, because it's records going forward, but then we have the records going back probably. So,
Oh, so, okay.
it just
got
takes a while to, get all that scanned, and then you can get rid of the hard stuff mostly.
Okay.
Terrific.
Facility security upgrades review. This began as a recommendation in our fiscal 13 audit that the 37 Washington Street building ought to be reviewed and some security upgrades put in, and we've expanded it to make it into a review of all town buildings that have the public in and out, including the town buildings. So the idea is that we engage a security expert to give us recommendations on how to upgrade our security needs. There might be locks that get changed, cameras, things like that. Contribution toward pond harvester. There's some additional thinking going on about this item. We've been approached by a group called the Nantucket Pond Coalition as to the town and other groups getting more active in pond management, particularly right at the moment, Hummock Pond. There's a lot of vegetation that is on the bottom of the pond that inhibits good circulation and health of the pond. So the idea would, the original idea is that a pond harvester, which is a piece of equipment that is operated by somebody, not somebody from the town, but probably the land bank, and the land bank would be a contributor, and possibly the land council, and also this Nantucket Pond Coalition. They would operate it from within whatever window you can do this and get all the vegetation out, or whatever they can, and it gets taken to a landfill and incorporated in the compost process. But we had a discussion as recently as yesterday internally about maybe we don't need to buy our own equipment or contribute to buying our own equipment. Why don't we just hire somebody to do this on a routine basis?
That's actually.
So I need to talk to them about that. This may come up at our Board of Selectmen's meeting tonight. We have a workshop meeting tonight. The topic is water quality, and we're going to get into pond water quality, and a principal of the Nantucket Pond Coalition, Bob Williams, will be there. And I'm certain we're going to have a discussion about this.
Yeah.
So this is sort of subject to some amount of change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, that was I had a big question around that.
Okay.
Same thing, good.
Yep.
Good.
Okay, next, fire. New fire station, 14.7 million. It started out as 13 something, and now it's gone up to 14. Now, when the chief comes in, he has a update from the architects about the cost. He's probably reviewed it with the fire station work group. Fire station work group, Peter can more address this, but I think they're close to wrapping up their recommendations.
Good.
And I think the main recommendation is going to be to build a new fire station here and proceed to sell the land where the current fire station is. Ultimately, and that's in the spreadsheet, that those proceeds could be used to offset the debt service for the new fire station project.
How much a square foot is the new fire station?
Do you have it handy? We use, I think, around $450 for this building.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's the number that's bouncing around.
specifically. It's probably between $450 and $500. Replacement of Scott air packs. These are required equipment for firefighters fighting fires, and they periodically need to be replaced. This wouldn't be the replacement of every single one that they have The replacement is phased, but it's time to begin some of the replacement of these things, so that's what this is.
Oh, wait, here it is, it's 215 square feet for the 8.4 million, so he doesn't have it per square foot. But 8.4 divided by 22,000.
We'll make sure when he comes in to have that.
You don't think replacement of Scott air, the air packs is part of operating expenses?
Well, we have had a discussion about that. The thing is, they're not an annual item.
Mhm.
They're every 3 to 5 or 7 years,
Mhm.
something like that. So
Mhm.
we kind of did struggle with this.
Mm.
Potentially, if we have room in the operating budget, maybe we do put it in there.
Yeah,
But
I think it's one
Mark
of
can
those that,
explain a little more about the replacement needs.
yeah.
IT and GIS, desktops, printers replacement, that's been an annual amount of $50,000. Again, you can't replace everything in the town for $50,000 a year, so that is phased.
Surprised it
and
hasn't gone up every year.
Well, I know, they
Well,
try to really do the
because
best
cost
they
of that's
can
gone
with what
down.
they're
Mm.
given.
Get more for your money, yeah.
Yeah.
Same money,
School, I'm not gonna go try to explain their items, they can do that, but we have met with them to go over all of these things, and I think you probably know, 30 million for a new school is a number that they were very, very, very reluctant to come up with, so we, us, sitting here, put in this number. So Mr. Kozor is very, he doesn't want to put a number. But we had to put a number for our long-term capital financing plan, to
Yeah.
get something in there. I think the thinking is this might actually be a bigger number as things proceed, but maybe not, depending on the option. So you'll have to keep us up to date.
That's not an itch, that's a nod.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we went, yeah, and we had a lot of discussion about that last year. You
Yes.
can't function until someone puts a number. Either he puts a number or we'll put a
Now
number.
So we
You know,
said we're going to do it.
Correct.
Gee, you know.
Well, the other thing he said was that this was the least expensive way for us to go, because this building didn't require a gym and didn't require a lot of the ancillary things that a
Yeah.
junior high and a high school. And then to come in with 30 million, I think people were a little shocked about that.
It's a big
Well,
number.
When are we gonna have a better number? I mean,
Well, I
Tonight's
think-
meeting is broken up into two groups. There's a site design and development part of the group, which is putting out a sheet that gives everyone a chance to vote on where they think the best site is. And until you get a site, you really can't put a number to a building.
Yeah. And there's lots of things
A
contingent.
lot
on
of
other
things
things.
to get to and from the building and how it flows with the existing site, so there's a lot there. The building itself is probably close to that, but then you have all the getting to it, getting from the infrastructure, the curb cuts, the access points.
sounds to me like somebody's gotta put a stake in the ground, because if it'll just keep going out, and then 5 minutes before town meeting, we find out what the cost is.
No, you'll see a stake in the ground probably within a month's time. Because there has to be a myriad of open houses throughout the community,
Well, that's right, exactly.
starting right after the holiday season.
Yeah, and that's the point, you know. We can have to deal with it, but the big deal is with the rest of the town, you know.
So that's that. Now, I'm happy to take you through enterprise, but I'm not really the enterprise fund project presenter for most of them.
I agree.
So maybe just a quick overview. Airport, we already have pre-met with all the departments at length about all of their projects. So they've got a number of items in here, a lot of equipment replacements. The big things are ramp rehab. We've got this new high-speed snow blower plow. And they have some offsets from federal and state grants. Island Home, we put in $500,000 for design for a new facility, and the board asked me the other night, what would the idea be about where this would go, and I have said Sherburne Commons is where we're talking about. That was pretty much kind of sort of the recommendation of the Island Home Long-Term Planning Work Group 2 years ago. We need to move on this.
It's free land, basically.
It's
I own
land.
it already.
It's our
I like that word.
land.
Right.
People have asked me recently, well, what would happen with the land that the Island Home is on currently? And I think we've worked something out with the land bank probably. My personal sort of opinion or perspective is I don't get the sense that the community would want to sell that and have it developed. my sense is that a group like the Land Bank would potentially acquire it and keep it for open space, views, things like that.
Would they pay the town for it?
They would potentially pay yes, they would pay
But-
the town for it. I don't know if they would pay market value, but they would pay something for it.
Oh, I hate this conversation, I could go, oh.
Okay,
Tax
let's
rolls.
move on.
Tax rolls.
Well, wait
I
a
mean,
minute.
we've
Yeah,
got-
it's a
you've
tax
got-
Before we move on,
I mean, you
awful lot.
got the potential, you have to think about this now, okay? The land bank bought that little piece from John King down there on the left, all right, when you get down East Creek or whatever
Yeah.
the name of the road
East
is.
Creek.
Yeah.
You got the thing with, oh God, what was the guy's name on the finance committee? That land is gonna be developed,
Oh, yeah,
all right?
Yes.
Whatever. his
I
name
can't
is.
think of his
Yeah,
name,
it
but I know
doesn't
what you-
matter.
I know who you mean, yeah.
Right. Marine lumber is probably someday gonna be residential someday. I mean, I'll bet you something happens down the road, in another lifetime, but it may. You're gonna see, Mike Backman's house get cut up into pieces and moved soon, okay? But the land all around it is not. It's gonna stay residential. So it's kind of a tough one. I hate seeing land stay off the tax rolls, but if that's what the voters want, that's fine. This tax issue is something that we need to keep our eye on as far as like,
It's a trade-off.
there's more land on Washington Street's gonna be coming off the tax rolls. It's,
Well, the Odison property is already.
the Odison's already off it, that's another, yes, I know, and that's why it ties into this, but the landmark house, is that ever gonna be replaced, or is it gonna go away? Is that the town owns that,
The
right?
town owns the land.
Land.
Do they pay taxes? I doubt it.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, I don't think
Oh,
so.
no.
Yeah, see, so,
It's town owned.
It's a non-profit.
Non-
No.
yeah.
yeah, that's what I kinda figured, so, okay.
I would just say that it would be really interesting to do an analysis of the land that the town has recently sold as to the balance
sale
between the
program?
tax, the balance between the tax roll talk and new development and things like that. I just think this is just an opinion, that people want to have public access to the water. We hear about that pretty constantly. And if you're going to develop that area, there's not going to be public access to the water anymore, to a place where there traditionally was public access, and that's been a big
Well,
issue.
one of my gripes is the town, we don't really supply town parks for year-round employees, for their toddlers, et cetera, et cetera. Or we do have them, they're not very good, and we need to do a lot better job, and this would be another great place for a park.
I think
Gotta
if
be
you
able
look
to
at
have a
that
boat ramp.
if you look at that carefully,
True.
you can do both.
Mm.
Yeah, because when you talk about land, you're talking about land here all the way to the water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no one says you have to sell it all the way to the water.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of people, particularly in private dwellings, they're more interested in the view than they are in having access, although they all want access too, but that you can't have everything you want. But you could work it out both ways, because I think we just need to be a little careful, and I agree with Nat on that, about having too much coming off tax rolls and so forth, because I just think that's a slippery slope, and we've got to be careful about that. And I
It's
think you
not
can
on
do
the tax
both
roll
there.
now,
Right.
right?
Right.
But you can do both there, I think, if you really look at it.
You have to think about a real boat ramp to offset the children's
Well,
beach nightmare.
Is there a committee?
Someday.
I'm sorry, we talk about there's a committee here, there's a committee here. Is there a committee for the island home? And
No.
these are all great discussions and just,
Well, there was a
someone's got to
long-term
study
planning
it.
committee, and we could probably get.
David Worth, was he
together.
involved in that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me,
You know,
it just this, what they've got here for $1,177,000, is that going to be able to be covered with their retained earnings, or?
Well, we've been talking about that too. It's a little early to tell because we don't have retained earnings certified yet, but we're thinking probably not all of it.
yeah, because you've got GF for the 500,000
So some of that is going to have to come into the town.
Probably.
general
Yeah.
fund.
Now, the other items there, I won't go through them all, but at least the building-related items, these, regardless of a new building, these things have to get done because we're going to
Yep.
start failing our state inspections for
Yeah,
nursing home
yeah,
code compliance.
We got through that last year,
Yeah,
a
we
lot of
went through the
detail.
whole thing
yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
They need a new resident transport vehicle. The one they have now is sort of unreliable. It's not really quite the right vehicle, so that would be used anyway, no matter where we go to the building. sewer, Kara's gonna need to explain the big ticket item of 8.8, but the Baxter Road alternative access sewer design, again, if and when we need to build a new road, depending on the failure level of Baxter Road, there may need to be sewer redone in the area, and which could ultimately be better. And I said sewer enterprise and general fund, because I just don't know how that's gonna end up. I'm not sure the sewer users would be appropriate to pay for an alternative sewer design for a small group. The pump station upgrade, so I don't really remember the details, honestly, of the 8.8, but Kara can talk about that.
I think that was a long
Grinding
discussion
stuff.
at the Board of
That
Selectmen's
was,
meeting.
yes, it was.
Libby, and I don't, I can get very frustrated about this one, as everybody in this room can.
Once they find out the truth about it.
Because if it's, you're looking at 9 million here, but if you look at the next year, it's what, and that's the boulder sitting in the road.
Yes, it is. So
Yeah,
on
I mean
that,
sewers in general.
Yeah, because if you take everything in the next 5 years that we have to do, and then you have the ratepayer pay it, if they think they got high sewer rates now, hang on.
right. The draft comprehensive wastewater management plan update is out. The Board of Selectmen reviewed it, is in the process of reviewing it, and once they're comfortable with having reviewed it, it will be released. I expect the sewer planning work group will start to review it. One of the sewer planning work group's charges is to come up with recommendations and options on financing the sewer projects. We all know they're huge. They're out there. There will be new users added ultimately to help offset some of the costs, but every municipality in the Cape and Islands is facing huge sewer costs. We're not the only ones, but
Oh, I
it's
know.
maybe a little more critical for us, so we don't endanger our groundwater.
Yeah,
It's almost like forget the buildings, the sewers are gonna be about the same
Well,
big hit,
there is going to be a big hit with sewers,
and it's probably
and
gonna be
it's been
general
coming
fund.
for a number of years now.
Yeah.
one of the things we need to look for when we redo the thing ultimately,
Yep. The
One of the-
plan.
the plan, and looking out 10 years, and is that we've got to assign the sewer thing somewhere. And I think we need to talk about that, because in my view, it just, Phil just said, well, that's going to be a general fund issue. Well, I guess.
Well, it may be a combination.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be a combination, it's gonna, it
That's
is gonna
right.
be, we keep keeping it out of the general fund conversation, but I think.
See, that's
it'll
my
start
point,
coming
is it
into
really needs to get into some of
Yes.
it needs to get into the general fund conversation,
Yes.
because, let's face it, it's going to, some
Yeah.
of it, it's
Yeah.
not all.
Island-wide issue.
I agree. Yeah, I think, and again, we have a group that's supposed to be working on that.
Yeah,
That's what I was gonna ask, are they?
but I talked to Dool yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
and he said they haven't met for a long time.
Well, they were waiting for the report to come out.
Okay.
It's out, but it hasn't been publicly released yet, including to them, so it will be very shortly, and then they need to start meeting about it. I don't expect us to have a big sewer item other than what's in here right now.
For 2016.
There's just gonna have to be, like you're saying, a lot more public discussion about it, a lot more reviewing of the funding recommendations.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Solid waste, there's 2 items. Continuation of landfill mining, this is our 6th year of mining. That actually, we keep struggling with where we show this, but it actually has been coming out of the general fund budget, operating budget.
That's that's going to be operating budget?
Yep, and it will remain that way for.
Okay, that'll
16.
remain there, okay.
Line landfill fill cell engineering and construction. This was an item that started out more like at 1.4 million. We've had a lot of discussions with Waste Options and with our engineer and our consultant, and it's down to 1 million, but it is going to have to be funded for fiscal 16.
Is this for residuals? Libby,
I think it's,
it's gotta be.
no, because I don't think the residuals necessarily have to go into a line cell. It's a new cell because the old cell's getting full.
But for what, with what though? I mean,
It is for some residuals, yes. There are residuals that can be put in a line cell, but there are others that cannot.
okay.
Retained earnings here?
Retained earnings might potentially cover this.
Okay. Because if it does, it's sort of a horse piece, I guess, because the general fund is subsidizing a hunk of that anyway.
Well, anyway, yeah.
So, but it just, I just want, from a purpose of where do you put things?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Want to comment, Bob can come explain these things. I don't know if they will be affected by the hospital situation or not. So, back to page 3 for a second, and the almost $5 million worth of projects, obviously about half of that is the school item. And then I just listed out the things that we don't quite know yet, but which will offset the total. So that's the proceeds from real estate sales that I talked about, the priority capital article reappropriations I mentioned, free cash. Capital from the operating budget, we plugged in an amount already for that, $788. Waterways was $350. And then if we were to, I mean, we're not going to sell the fire station property in fiscal now, so we won't have that number to offset here, but potentially going forward, when we have a number, it could be offset. And then the debt service, either from operating or excluded debt, if approved through town meeting. We also haven't really put in if we would have a capital override, a 1-year override for a particular project, which would raise the tax rate for just for a year. In any case, those are just things that will all help go to offset
Yeah.
the kind of worst case scenario that's here now.
Free cash was about $5 million last year. You think
Yeah.
it's going to be anywhere near that this year? Or?
Okay. We are
Are
not
you open a
going
can
to
of worms?
say.
I'm sorry.
Someone tried to get us out of this yesterday at an audit committee meeting, and
Yeah, gee.
we don't want anybody to fall in love with the number.
Yeah.
So we're not
All
going
right,
to say
I
the
won't
number.
even
I would
ask
agree.
it then.
Won't even ask it.
Okay.
You'll find out soon.
That ends up being.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to find out before the
We
end
don't
of the
know.
month. You said this,
It's going to be soon anyway, so.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's
there's
gonna
no
be very
sense
soon.
in, yeah, I'd rather get the
I
actual.
don't want people to get married to a number, so.
Yeah, I would like to
I-
get married to a date, though,
I would.
by the end of the month.
I've been trying to get married to a date, so. I've actually
want a
married the
date.
date of the end of October, so.
Yeah, I like, yeah, and
More
that's
than
fine,
likely
because
sooner
that
than-
gives us plenty of time to see it, and understand it, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the next item on the agenda is election of officers.
You know, before we get to that, and I don't, if I'm taking too much time, just tell me, but, you know, when I sat at the Board of Selectmen's meeting and listened to it,
Last
I'm
week.
looking around the room and everything else, and I'm sitting there saying, now, how is this gonna fly at town meeting, you know? And I think, I just wanted to mention it once and say, we should keep in mind, and I think this group needs to keep in mind, the fact that we can, everything's tier 1, number 1. So when we talk, we're going to have to start talking about priorities ourselves, what we think is important, because if we think that we're going to send all of those projects to town meeting, you know, forget about it. So the question is, some of them are going to have to be moved off. Even though with the smoothing that you can do with financial smoothing, you're still going to have to move some of them off. You look at that curves that are in this report, and it doesn't have to be as bad as it looks over time. But it's going to take some really hard work to figure out how that comes out. And part of that is the selection process of what is important and what isn't quite as important.
Yeah.
It's all important.
Having said that, which is part of future meeting topics
Okay.
review, but having said that, Cinder can do modeling. So I was thinking that, picking up where John just left off, if there are different ways of looking at the capital projects, we can model those to see what the various, if there's 2 or 3 different ways of going, that this committee thinks, hey, well, what about this, what about this, what about this? We model that, and then we see, because I think ultimately it's going to get down to dollars. It always does get down to dollars. So, you know, the trade-offs have to do with dollars and tax rates and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get there this year. I think that's one of the roles of
I
this
don't-
committee this year is going to be, you know, various options and presenting the options. And then
Yeah, the
people have the
can
opportunity to
just
select.
stopped. We can't kick it down further.
Right. So
It
2
just
quick
stopped.
things. We have been talking about many of these projects for years.
That's right.
And we keep kicking them down the road.
That's right.
And the more we kick them down the road, the worse off we're going to be ultimately. We said 2, maybe almost 3 years ago now, We need a long-term capital financing plan in order to let the voters know what the long-term impact is going to be on their tax rate. We have it, we need to talk about it. The tax rate impact right now is not that significant if you are going to compare it to other towns' tax rates and other towns' projects.
However, what people do is they compare it to the increase. You know, they say, well, is it a 10% increase or is it 12%? So gradually you have to work it up. But the other thing is, a lot of what's going to hit the taxpayers isn't here yet because sewers and island home, and so it's going to be a tough thing.
The sewers isn't here. That's true. Island home is in the long-term financing plan.
It is.
It's in there now, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
But not to hitting the general fund, really.
Well, actually, I think,
Is it?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
remember.
Peter?
Just to reinforce this point that we're talking about, one thing that would be, I think, very useful would be to ask Cinder early on if she could just give us a range of, you know, what is possible around these $179, you know, at a $500,000 impact, $467 at a $1.3 million impact, just so we have some sense of the various ways of financing this. I mean, I'm looking at this and saying, we're talking about much of this, many of these big ticket items are what I would regard as the orderly upgrading of infrastructure. And you can do it in an orderly fashion or you can do it in a disorderly fashion. And there are hidden costs to delaying it. You can do it now, or you can say, what would happen if it was 2 years later and we asked the same questions? What would Cinder be telling us? Would the numbers change? And having just some, and these don't have to be precise calculations, but just the notion that we're in an environment now where interest rates are low. No one knows what they'll be 2, 3, 5 years from now. But it would be useful to say, I can tinker with the smoothing and I can make the 467 go as low as 300, or it could go even higher. But what's a range that we could think about? And then just say, you know, try to imagine it was 2 years later, what would those same numbers be as best as you can tell us, and just ballpark ideas so we know what we're talking about. Because I'm looking at this and saying, are we talking about a 15-year mortgage for the home or a 30-year mortgage? Is it interest only for the first 5 years and then something else? There are all sorts of ways of structuring this. And I think taxpayers can relate to that and say, well, you got to put a new roof on the house. How did you want to make it affordable?
One of the things, the reason I said that about the model in 2 or 3 different scenarios is if you just ask Cinder to do that right now,
Yeah.
she's going to model what's there. And that makes the assumption that what's there is what we really want her to model.
Well, she's going to model.
That would be one of the options, but maybe there's a couple of
She'll
others.
model anything we want, and right now, what they're doing is they're truing the plan up based on this, all of the data and detail that was recently submitted, so that we have the most accurate
Yes.
view of what's happening.
Right.
We can have her model anything, and this model will, what I gave you was an absolute worst case scenario if the voters approve every single project at town meeting. We can, as we move through this process and the committee recommends and we decide to take some things off because there's alternate funding sources, that's going to change those numbers automatically anyway. And as we move forward, we can look at some of the big ticket projects and figure out, okay, we're going to use bond anticipation notes for 1, 2, 3 years, whatever they may be. And we can model that smoothing, and we can, the model can be created to show the debt falling off, which I think something in the neighborhood of 40 or 50% of the debt's falling off within the next 10 years anyway. So all of that is something that they're working on. What they're doing right now really is just truing the plan up, and then they're waiting for the direction from me to how we want to model this, how we want to smooth it, what's actually going to be borrowed, and how it's going to work.
Okay, what I'm calling for is not the equivalent of the construction plan. I'm calling for illustrative scenarios that may be accurate to, let's say, the nearest $10 per unit of value, just so we have some idea. I just want to know, is the 467, is that something you could bring down to 400 or 300 or 350?
We can bring it down based on moving projects.
Right,
down.
and kind of what are the limits of playing with this?
Scaling the borrowing into future years to bring the impact in the first year down. Projects coming off and being funded by alternate sources will bring that dollar value down. The other thing that'll bring that dollar value down too is the 470, the 179 and the what, 67 or whatever it was, is also based on the equalized value of 2014, and we're still going through the certification for the values now. That has an impact as well. So there are a lot of things that are still moving that have the ability to affect that dollar value.
John?
Yeah. Libby, one thing we haven't talked about, and I think it's key, and I think it kind of comes back to you, and that is, one of the things I thought about when I was looking at the Board of Selectmen's meeting is the town's ability to do everything at once. I'm talking about administrative now.
Yep.
And I have serious doubts that we can do everything at once
Yeah.
effectively.
No, we can't.
Yeah, and so, but we need guidance on that, because, and that's, you are the one that has probably the best overall feel of this, and so we're gonna need some kind of a guidance on that, because you can't do all these things at once, Peter, whether you want to do it or not.
Even if we can afford them.
I'm just talking about the
Yeah.
practical thing of getting things done.
Running the projects.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
How many projects can you run at the same time?
Well, without additional help, probably one.
Well, we're not hiring
When you talk,
I'm not saying
Jeez.
permanent hires, I'm saying professional project manager.
okay, and that gets sloppy for those of us who have gone through that many, many times. If you're not careful, if you get too much help from the outside and not enough internal control, you can have that can raise more problems than you ever dreamed of. So that's another issue. This is almost a gut thing.
Yeah.
It-
Well,
because-
we can try to work on a little bit more of a detailed kind of timeline, potential timeline for each project, and see what it would require internally.
All I'm saying is
It's another
my
issue.
guess is that we can't do everything that's on the list at the same time. So the question is, what can we do practically in your mind? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that starts to get at some of the things, that's another issue you gotta think about.
And what's saleable to the town? Saleable at
Well,
town meeting.
that's another issue, but
Exactly right.
the issue of just simply, you just can't do everything at once
That's
is
part of it, yeah.
got nothing
I
to do.
hadn't thought about that, and actually it would be helpful to have just just sort of something that says, basically, this is about what we could handle, and these are different ways of phasing. I had always been thinking about this as some of these things need to be started right away, and they need to get underway all at once. And I was not aware of the fact that you cannot.
How do you manage that?
At once, yeah.
Right. I'm, at the 30,000 foot level.
Yeah.
I never descend below
In
that.
private, in my experience in private business of building plants around the world, we had, as a corporation, we had rules around that. We said, look, we can only handle this much expansion at any given time, and that's pretty much the way we can. So we developed a plan based on being able to handle so much at a time. I mean, that's basically the way we looked at it.
And there's the DBN factor, doing
Yeah.
business on Nantucket. It's hard.
Yeah.
You get the seasonal issues of the boat. Mobilization is the most expensive thing there is for a company to come here, is mobilizing. That's 30% you haven't even started.
You could bring the same company for a few different projects at the same time.
Now, that's something interesting, CNC Construction. I actually have that on my little note here to ask a question. But you guys are all bringing up this. You know what this is like? This is exactly what the Steamship Authority is doing. You're going to hear me reference that. I appreciate being here. There's so much stuff to sell the board that votes for it, but you're really selling it to the ratepayers. We're selling it to the taxpayers. And the taxpayers that are voting are all on sewer. The taxpayers that are voting are getting hit. Sconset's been whacked. Okay? They never paid for water. Now they're paying for water for the last 50 years, it seems. It's a very confusing scenario. We're trying to sell something. So when Steamship comes to us to sort of sell us something, I'm looking over to the new finance guy that I haven't actually shook his hand yet. They did something the other day at our meeting that was very similar to this. How much can we handle at a time? How much bond? We just raised our bonding to $100 million. They're reissuing bonds existing to lower the interest rate. Are we doing that?
Yes.
Tell the public.
Absolutely.
No, this stuff is good.
I agree with you.
You have to sell the public on like that we're doing something, because the public thinks that we're just asking for money and we're running off into the.
Meeting,
Well, that's important, yeah, but I'm
It
talking
is.
about,
I agree, and. you
that's
know,
important.
Get a hold of the reporter and make sure she
The
understands.
thing is that.
Reducing, it's, people understand refinancing a mortgage. Well, we're doing it through bonding and all this crazy stuff that goes on with that big world. That's important.
I would agree
I have to be
with you.
somewhere 10.
Yeah, me too, but we do have a couple of things we need to do, and I think this is really healthy. I know we're going to have a lot of healthy discussions as we go
Well,
forward.
the
Well, we
sewer
covered
though,
the
just
broad
to get
strokes.
back on that sewer just for a second, I'm not trying to, I haven't caught up to John and talking yet, so, we haven't really had a sewer discussion in a while. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 2B. You know, we're not back in the mid-2000s when we were gonna do the Tier 2, the tertiary treatment, second level, whatever, all the stuff. Now we're talking about sewer in places that aren't sewered, getting things back in because we got rid of all the water downtown. I mean, we need a nuts and bolts discussion to sell to the voters. We do. The seasonal taxpayer has got to stop paying for some of this stuff. We have to, because if we don't do it, you already mentioned that, we're not going to be able to sell it to town meeting, because everybody at town meeting's on sewer. It's crazy, but that's exactly what's going to happen.
The issue here is not just the tax rate. It's the tax rate, the sewer rate, the water rate, because you can say that the taxes are cheaper here. You take the sewer rate and the water rate, add it to the taxes, and then
Yeah.
compare it, and I've done it a couple of times. We don't look so attractive anymore.
Yeah, that's why I meant about the general fund.
And if you look at the money we got left to spend, and if it's all gonna go on the sewer rate, okay, forget about it. Anyway,
Can we need to vote on officers, so before everybody leaves, we need to do that.
okay?
Okay.
You ready for nominations?
Well, I just wanted to mention that there's 3 officers that I know of. There's the chairman, there's the vice chairman, and there's a secretary. I think that's by statute. So I am currently the chairman. I think, Peter, you're currently the vice chairman? Oh, Carol was.
Carol was.
Carol's gone, okay. And you were the secretary.
You were the secretary.
I was.
The wordsmith.
Just so everybody
If
knows.
nominated, I will not run it.
Our wordsmith.
All right. You want to make a nomination?
I
Does
nominate.
anybody want to make a
I'll make a
nomination?
nomination for Phil to be chairman.
Second.
What if I decline?
No,
You don't, that's
it's
not
unallowed.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Vice chairman?
I'll make a motion for Peter.
Second?
This Peter.
Yes.
All right.
Nice now.
That means I have to be here if you're not here, is that right?
Right.
Okay. And what happens if neither of us is here?
Maybe the secretary?
All right. I'll reluctantly accept the nomination.
I seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, secretary? Secretary basically attempts to review the minutes that are put out by Terry. It's not a big job, but we do need to have a secretary.
Yeah, we just signed.
Anybody? Richard? Peter?
Richard? I think, personally, let me editorialize. I think Richard, with his background, would make an excellent person in this slot, if he's willing to do it.
I agree.
Do I hear a second?
I'm willing to do it.
Make that motion. Oh, Steve, make the motion.
A motion that Richard is the secretary of the committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we have officers.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you very much. I
Can I tell you
appreciate
a
your
quick schedule change?
confidence. Pardon me?
Yep.
Everybody has a schedule, right?
Yes.
Next week, you've got fire, police, marine, emergency management. I'm taking natural resources off because they don't actually have anything anymore. And I'm replacing them hopefully with IT.
Okay.
So that means on Wednesday, November 5th, I'm going to move, IT is out, and Island Home is moving up, and they'll be the only thing that day.
Okay, quick question on this. Libby, I assume we're going to be getting some information,
She's going to send you ahead of time.
and hopefully that'll be a little more detailed than the last sheets we got for the town administration.
Well, it's the sheets.
A lot of, but they're not filling, but a lot of them, they're not filling all the answers in, I think. is what-
Well, yeah, you don't, I learned a lot today about what was on these, what could have been put on these sheets. That's all.
what's not covered on the sheet?
Well, take the pond thing there. There was no discussion about that. I read the sheet, I said,
Well, okay. The pond sheet came out like a week ago, and the discussion happened yesterday
okay.
about the, let's not buy it, let's hire somebody. So I don't have time to
The sheet mentioned.
update the sheet every day.
Okay. Let me put it another way. Hopefully, we'll have enough information that we can deal with the details ahead of time. So, I mean,
Yes. So
read them
what
and
you-
understand them, and then,
I hope so too. So what you're gonna get is all the sheets for every department. So if there's things actually going through them, they
Ask the
think,
questions.
oh, where's the
Ask the questions
blah, blah,
back
blah
through me,
information?
please.
Yes.
yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Because everybody should ask questions.
Yeah.
That's expected. So if we can ask the questions to me ahead of time, we can get them to the department heads ahead of time, and they will not be blindsided, et cetera. Because we don't really want to be blindsiding anybody at
The
this.
question is, when do we get the sheets? Because
She's going to
No, I'll
get them
tell
all
you.
out to us.
When?
He's off. He doesn't have
Did she say
He told him to put his vehicle.
in advance, but
All the sheets.
she has all the sheets.
Everybody will
It's
do
a
it.
matter of just sending them out, right?
Yeah.
John was asking when we're going to get the sheets.
Oh, we said it at the beginning. The sheets are gonna come
I'm
out.
gonna email them by the end of the week.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and I'm gonna have them printed for next week's meeting because we did order iPads for the members that don't have iPads because we are not printing this year a book. They've been back ordered. They should be shipping this week, so probably by the third week of October, I hope we have them. So, but until then, I'll be providing paper packets for everybody, and I'll be emailing them in advance.
sooner the better on those sheets. Because,
Seriously?
seriously.
Okay.
Because if we're going to have questions,
Thank you.
we got to
I
get them
think,
back.
I think
to
I
Phil,
want
he's
to
gotta
keep
get
it
them
put
back.
together for.
Yeah, no, by the end of the week, that you're all gonna have them. So,
Tomorrow would be better.
well, tomorrow is Thursday. Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
Matt, we're not done yet.
Oh,
I think they're done, but
No,
we're-
I'm-
please,
sorry.
because I got to get going too, but I just
No, I
wanted to say,
wasn't sure
one of the
exactly
things
the
that John had mentioned to me ahead of time to bring up
Yeah.
was that we need to have an opportunity beyond whoever's presenting to us at that meeting to talk about the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the kind of stuff we kind of got into a lot of discussion about this morning, and maybe set aside, I don't know, a half hour, a meeting or something like that, 15, 20 minutes. Anyway, something where we have an opportunity to talk about the bigger picture and where we're coming from and what are the options and all that sort of thing. So, we'll enhance that 10 years.
Sorry about it.
If you look at your schedule,
Yes.
you might be able to work some of that in. Like,
Okay.
like for example, Island Palm on November 5th.
Not
There
gonna
were
be a
2
whole
requirements,
hour.
now there's 1.
Yeah.
Maybe they only take 45 minutes, half an hour.
Right.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
point.
I think you can
I
build
think
that in.
there's, it kind of, we've got so much to talk about, and we can't just talk about it when the department heads are here. We need to talk about it amongst ourselves.
We should be explicit on a schedule on when we're going to do this. In other words, just to say we're going to do it.
It's got to be a part of the agenda.
It's got to be part of the
Yeah.
agenda. It
That's a
has
good
to be
idea.
part of the agenda if we're going to do it. supposedly.
Martin, did you hear what we just said?
I did.
Okay, thank you. We just added to the agenda, because I don't want any closed meeting problems.
Yeah, that's the issue. The issue is, it's got to be part of the
It's gotta
agenda.
be on the agenda.
I'm going to redo that schedule that I sent out on September 24th.
All right.